a great group. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it and starting your Monday here. I know that's not always easy for folks, but we're delighted to have you all here. My name is Greg Riedman. I'm president of your Chamber of Commerce, Charles River Chamber. We are delighted to have you today with us. I want to thank the folks who made this possible, including the Newton Marriott and Dan Pickett, the general manager. Particularly want to thank our sponsors today, Northland and Rodman Employment Law, and as well as Cambridge Savings Bank and the MBTA Advisory Board. Really appreciate that. Please give them a round of applause for. We will be hearing from Congressman Auchincloss in just a moment, and then the governor will be here around 9:30. So we've got a nice program for you today, and hopefully some interesting information and perspectives on where we are in this moment in our lives, right? I did want to acknowledge, because this is our government meeting of the year, or this one, actually it's a meeting we just set up, our partners in government who are with us today. And there's a lot of them, and this is the part when everyone groans, why do you have to announce all the politicians, Greg? Well, first, we're grateful for them and for their partnership during the year. But also, so all of you know who to buttonhole on the way out today. Tell them about your concerns, let them know what's on your mind. So please, you've got your elected officials in the room, and they want to hear from you. They're anxious to know what's on the minds of the business community. This is your opportunity today. So Mayor Fuller is here from Newton, along with Senator Cream, Representative Peisch. We have the trio of freshman reps, Representative Sangiolo, Representative Schwartz, and Representative Tarski. We have Sheriff Patrick McDermott here with us today. City Manager Watertown George Prowakis is with us. The Wellesley Select Board is well represented with Chair Colette Frank, Beth Sullivan Woods, Marjorie Friedman, and Tom Ulfiger. The Newton City Council also well represented with Council President Mark Laredo, Susan Albright, Vicki Danberg, Julie Maliki, Pam Wright, Stephen Farrell. It's so much better it happens to me than to the governor, right? Stephen Farrell is here, David Mickley and Martha Bixby, all Newton City Councilors, Watertown City Councilors, Vice President Vince Pictorelli is here, Councilor Gardner and Councilor Bays, and Kevin Keene, the chair of the Needham Select Board, is here. We're also joined this morning by several of our partners in business advocacy and some of their members as well. Please join me in welcoming Rayed Shiad, who's the head of the Metro West Chamber, Melina Richards from the Waltham Chamber, and Chris Modi from the Brookline Chamber. And welcome to them and to all of you and to their members that are here in the room with us today. So now you can applaud. And this one's working now too, good. And now I'd like to bring up Councilor Auchincloss. I'm one of those guys who wants to spend a long time telling you their bio. You know this guy, I'll just remind you. He grew up in Newton kid, considered the city councilor for 2 terms. I probably asked him some of these same questions I'm gonna ask him later when he was a city councilor, elected to Congress in 2020. And please give a warm welcome to our Congressman, Jake Auchincloss.
Good morning. It's very nice to be with you. Thank you, Greg, for your leadership of the Charles River Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for spending this time with me. I've had the privilege of being the representative of the Massachusetts 4th, going into my 3rd term now. My second day in office was January 6, 2021, and I was kind of hoping that was going to be my worst day in Congress, and events are slowly proving me wrong. It's kind of all been hard, but it is actually the privilege of a lifetime to do this work. And it's really 3 jobs in one. 1, I've got to deliver for the district. 2, I have to advance your priorities. And 3, I've got to fight for your values. And with my staff, we have tried to do that work over the last 5 years. Delivering for the district has taken many forms, but I think most relevantly for this audience this morning, it means unlocking more housing production. And through community-directed funding and through the bipartisan infrastructure law, trying to deliver the infrastructure and transportation funding that can unlock developable land here in Massachusetts 4th, because the single biggest economic challenge facing the Commonwealth has been and is the high cost of housing. Your employees cannot afford to live in this state. It's a great place to live if you can afford it, and regrettably, fewer and fewer people, particularly younger people, in the Commonwealth can. And I'm going to continue to be laser focused on how we deliver for the Massachusetts 4th when it comes to unlocking more housing production, because ultimately the answer is to build more housing. When it comes to advancing priorities, that has involved working in both a partisan and a bipartisan fashion, given the issue. Again, most relevantly here for, I think, employers small and medium-sized has been the cost of health insurance. My guess is, if I asked you to raise your hands right now, most employers would say that either their first, second, or third top issue is the cost of health insurance. And when I talk to municipalities, a first or second or third issue is the cost of health insurance. It's inflating at double digits, twice as fast as general inflation. And while there are myriad factors, one of them is the rapacious greed of the health insurance corporations. They have captured Washington in too many different ways, and we have to unravel the vertical integration of these health insurance corporations. And it starts with taking them out of their middlemen position in the prescription drug supply chain. I've helped author bipartisan legislation to reform the pharmacy benefit managers that have been price gouging and rent seeking for decades now behind an opaque supply chain that serves their interests but does not serve patients, pharmacists, employers, or plan sponsors. That bill was 12 hours away from being passed in December in a bipartisan fashion when Elon Musk tweeted about it. And Speaker Johnson flinched and dropped the bill from the floor. We're now fighting to get it reconsidered again. And this leads me to my third, and I think most relevant today, job, which is to fight for your values. Massachusetts is about to celebrate in 2 weeks the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which is a good time to remind Washington, D.C. that we do not like kings, and we do not like people who act like kings. We believe that Canada is an ally and Russia is an enemy. We believe that the measles vaccine works, and we believe in evidence-driven policy and the support of science. And most of all, we believe in the rule of law, not the law of the ruler. And unfortunately, the rule of law is under assault right now. Our framers envisioned this. They understood that this could happen, and particularly they understood that an executive could get out of control, which is why they designed our tripartite separation of powers. But here's the problem. The judiciary is doing its job right now, but it's a one-on-one fight between the presidency and the judiciary because Congress will not get off the sidelines because Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune don't think that they are leaders of a separate and co-equal branch of government. They think they're courtiers. They're taking selfies in the Oval Office. They're going down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. They are not doing their jobs. So Democrats have to ask ourselves, how do we do our jobs, not in a partisan way, but in a constitutional way, when Article 1 is failing to get off the sidelines and fight alongside the judiciary? And I think it's a two-part answer. First, we got to fight, and second, we got to win. When you're in the minority, fighting inside the Beltway is important, and this continuing resolution that Chuck Schumer folded on was the wrong way to do that. But when you're in the minority in the Beltway, you also have to fight in the states. And so we've got to take this directly to the people. And whether it's the fight oligarchy rallies or whether it's town halls in Republican districts, we have to galvanize the electorate around the idea that upending due process for Americans or cutting Medicaid to pay for tax cuts for people who don't need tax cuts is not the quote-unquote mandate that this guy claims that he has. And ultimately, though, we've got to win next November because the ultimate separation of power and check on balance is a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives where we can lame duck this guy and no, he's not going to run for a third term. That is not going to happen. But if Democrats are going to win, and I'll close on this, if Democrats are going to win, it's not enough to be against Trump. Americans know that we don't like Trump. Clearly, that's not enough. Americans give power to the people and to the party that knows what they're going to do with it. And I don't think Americans know what Democrats want to do with power. We have to explain in clear and compelling terms what we want to do with power. We want to lower costs by building out housing in this country, building out clean energy in this country. We want to end corruption by ending gerrymandering or closed or partisan primaries or stock trading by members of Congress. We want to take on the social media and health insurance corporations that have captured Washington, D.C. Ultimately, we have to have a clear agenda that Americans can gravitate towards and not simply be the party that is their vector for opposition to Donald Trump, because that is not a sustainable majority-making message. And my job as a younger Democrat in Congress is to help our party come up with the big and bold ideas that can help us not just win the midterms in 26, but take back power from MAGA in 28 and beyond. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that. And thanks for being here. So we got a couple dozen questions submitted from attendees over the weekend, and 90% of them were, how are you going to save democracy, Congressman Auchincloss? So let's start with the easy one, right? And you talked about it a little bit. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's inside and outside over the next 18 months. The inside is oversight functions. So for example, I'm on the health subcommittee. I have oversight over health and human services and RFK. And I'm working my Republican colleagues on this committee about measles, about Peter Marks, who's the top vaccine scientist, getting voted or purged from health and human services and the FDA. And while I don't think we're going to see any profiles in courage on the other side of the aisle, there is a willingness on a case-by-case basis to do some bipartisan oversight, particularly now that we've got fully confirmed commissioners of the FDA and the NIH to work with. So there is this oversight game that we can do in the near term. There is, of course, litigation, and our attorneys general, led by Andrea Campbell, have done a terrific job of blocking many of the Trump administration's most egregious illegal maneuvers. One example are these cuts to the National Institutes of Health, for example. Also, of course, as we're seeing the illegal deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members. There is appropriations, and this is the one where I'm most frustrated, is they need our votes really only for one thing, and that's to fund the government over the next 18 months, to fund the government and to raise the debt ceiling. And there's a chance that they could stuff the debt ceiling into their reconciliation package, which is their partisan tax cut extension package. Our absolute focus of effort as a minority party has to be to pull that debt limit out of the reconciliation package and then use it as leverage. Because that is the one thing that they really need from us, is to raise the debt limit in these next 6 months. And we have to peel off basically 3 or 4 Republicans in order to do that. We don't even need the Republicans to agree with us on the debt limit. We just need them to agree to not put the debt limit in another not otherwise big partisan package. If we can do that, we get another bite at the apple for leverage. And then, of course, the government funding runs out in September, and we'll have, again, an appropriations fight that we can try to win. But we have to understand that simply offering Democratic votes for some policy wins, that's a business as usual bill, and this is not a business as usual time. This is a stand and fight time, and we've got to be much tougher about the negotiations around funding the government. Then finally, though, there's the outside game, and this, I think, is the most important over the next year, which is we have to build public pressure across the states, red states and blue states, that culminates in the summer before the elections next year, where public pressure functionally becomes the third branch of government, right? We have the judiciary, we have the presidency, we've got a Congress that is sidelined itself because of its speaker, but if we can bring public pressure to bear, we have created, what the founders referred to as we the people. Really, it's the ultimate branch of government.
So I want to ask about some of those things you mentioned, immigration and NIH, but a couple more questions that came to us through this. One is, that people are frightened, that people are concerned, and that people are unhappy with the Democrats and the way that it's responded. So what can the Democrats do? Is it right for folks to be mad at the Democrats, yes or no?
On immigration?
On everything.
I think, 5 million people cross the border without documentation. Yep. People should be mad about that, yes. And I said so publicly during the Biden administration. It's not a secure border to have 5 million people cross the border without any documentation or any due process or orderly intake. And Massachusetts and many other states bore the brunt of that with huge bills and really an unruly system for trying to house people in a compassionate way. So yeah, I think Americans are right to say, after COVID, you took your eye off the ball on this one on the border. Now, having said that, the Republicans are trying to create this false tension between being a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. We are both. We absolutely need to have a secure border and an orderly process for documenting individuals here. We also, though, are made immeasurably economically and culturally richer by immigration. Massachusetts has been welcoming immigrants for 400 years. We should continue to do it. And when masked officers pull a young Turkish student off the street for writing an op-ed, that's not who we are as a country, and we need to oppose that.
Thank you. So let's talk about a few issues. Are there economic policies coming from this administration that are the right thing, that you agree with?
I'm trying to be, not reflexive here. Really, I mean, the thing is, here's how I'd answer that. The dominant economic policy they have is tariffs, right? And I'm a free trader. I believe in free and open markets. I think that is actually good for our manufacturers and good for consumers. But I also can understand that different countries have different environmental and labor and governance standards, and that does create an unlevel playing field. And of course, China is sort of the archetypal example of this. And I'm happy to believe and to assent to some kind of stable negotiated tariff that tries to internalize that problem. Particularly, I would add about carbon, actually. There's a bipartisan bill waiting to get passed that is a carbon adjusted border tariff that basically is a way to both create money for clean energy investments and also to have the tariffs that so many lawmakers want. But the worst possible way to do tariffs is by tweet. I mean, doing it every 3 hours. Oh, we're going to do 25% on this car part and then 40% on this, electricity that no one even knows how to levy that tariff on electricity. Like, uncertainty is poison to business. I don't have to tell this crowd that. And he is pumping uncertainty into our global and local business climate. And that is a way to talk a good economy into a recession.
Right. And Wednesday is Liberation Day.
Liberation Day, yeah.
So, okay. I think I understood that. So I'm glad you led with housing. Thank you for talking about that. That's a key priority for us. And I know it's always been a priority for you, including when you were a city councilor and we worked together in that area. So polls over the last year or so showed that the public understood we have a housing crisis. They know it's an affordability crisis and a supply crisis. And yet, here in Newton, 3 city councilors lose their job for being the most pro-city councilors on the ballot in contested ballots. In Wellesley, we had a similar case where a city councilor, a select board member lost her job because she was very out front on housing. And in Needham, we might see the same thing happen next week. We also saw Needham voters by a 60% margin reject an ambitious MBTA communities plan. What does that tell you about where folks are at? And then the second part of that is, how do we move the public in our communities towards better understanding and better supporting the need for more housing?
I think first we should just start with the frame of the challenge. Massachusetts is short 250,000 units of housing over the next 10 years, according to the Massachusetts Unlocking Housing Production Report. We're on pace to build probably 10% of that. So we're not even trending in the right direction, actually. And my view is, while it's important, the MBTA Communities Act is important, and we do want localities to organically start to zone for missing middle housing and accessory dwelling units, the state is also going to have to take more muscular action. There's a couple things that it could do. One, we're very good as a government at subsidizing demand for housing. We're less good at subsidizing supply of housing. And the state now has the Momentum Fund, which is a way to offer no interest or low interest loans to developers who are building affordable housing. That's a good start, and I applaud the governor for that. I think it should be expanded. Number 2, there's a lot of brownfield sites. There's a decommissioned prison. There's decommissioned military bases throughout Massachusetts that could be directly zoned by the state and build not hundreds, but thousands or even tens of thousands of units of housing without going through direct local zoning. And the final one, the third rail, I'm going to get struck by lightning here, is the governor can unilaterally change Chapter 40B regulations about what the safe harbor limit is. And that would be a nuclear option, to be clear, but it would be the kind of stick that could galvanize more local action.
Right. So would allowing 2 units per parcel or 4 units per parcel where there's the right infrastructure, both of which are a part of that same.
Yeah, I mean, we can go through the Unlocking Housing Production Report, and I agree with basically all of it, including their far-out ones. I think any building up to 5 stories should only have to have one staircase. My fellow city councilors will remember my view on parking, ban parking minimums across the state. They're a subsidy for cars at the expense of housing.
So, but let me go back to my question, which is, voters keep saying in our communities that they don't want this stuff, or at least they keep on electing the right candidates, and they said it pretty loud and clear they didn't need them to be as ambitious as they did. How do we help the public understand this?
Well, I think part of it is communicating what makes housing cheaper. I don't think rent control is actually the answer, but that is the most popular policy approach. And so there's some tough political conversation to have to say that actually rent control is not going to get us to lower rents. Building supply of housing is going to get us to lower rents.
Okay, let's move on. SALT, the cap on local tax deduction is before you in the days to come, in the months to come. It disproportionately hurts Massachusetts residents to have this cap and other expensive states. But as I understand it, there's several folks, Democrats and Republicans from California, New York, and New Jersey and Illinois have all lined up behind a bill to pass SALT, but nobody from the Bay State is part of that bill, according to the BBJ. Help us understand where you are on that, and why isn't anyone in Massachusetts also advocating to removing the SALT cap?
It's an issue that I'll look at as part of a broader tax bill, but I'm not. The way SALT has surfaced in Congress over the last few years has been these kind of SALT or nothing mini caucuses, where members have claimed that they're not going to vote for something unless SALT is taken care of, and then they back down at the last minute. And I'm not going to be part of that crew. I think as a tax bill is never going to be a single solitary tax issue. It's going to be part of a broader tax bill, and I'll look at the broader tax bill on the merits.
Okay. I wanted to ask another question that someone suggested. Tim Snyder, in his book on tyranny, presents a number of rules for how you resist tyranny, let's just say. Rule number 1 is do not obey in advance. I think we're seeing that, though, in some cases, from law firms, from colleges, from companies. How do you feel about that? That being forced to maybe obey before, and do you actually see that that's what people are doing?
There are definitely cases where that is happening. I think the law firms is a good example of that. The law firms need to be banding together, and businesses need to be banding up with the law firms, and businesses saying we will only work with law firms that are standing by the value of an independent counsel for individuals, because going after law firms' independence goes right to the heart of Americans' expectations of due process. I think the universities one, we have to be careful about painting with a broad brush. Columbia is being used as an example of a university that's caving to the Trump administration. I don't actually necessarily think that's the case. I think Columbia was in grotesque violation of its Title VI obligations to maintain a suitable learning environment. And it takes federal money. And the federal government, whether it's Biden or Trump, is allowed to come to university and say, actually, your students can't storm a university hall wearing masks and deprive other students of the opportunity to sit in class and learn that they've been paying for. So I understand that there's going to be some heartburn about that amongst faculty. And do I think that some of it was pretextual? And of course. But we have to be careful about saying any university that changes its code of conduct or cleans up its act is somehow obeying in advance. I don't think that's the case. I think these universities have some real soul searching to do.
Okay. I want to go back to housing for a second. So I've heard you talk about how the way we build housing is part of our challenge. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Construction productivity has gone down in the last 70 years. It's one of the only industries where productivity has actually declined. And not the only way, but one way to make housing cheaper is not just zoning or financing, which we've talked about, but also construction, which is to make it more of a product and less of a project. We build housing. I think a useful way to think about that is to imagine that you built your car the way that we build housing, which is to say that you stood in your driveway, you called up a general contractor, they called up a bunch of subcontractors, and they built you a car in your driveway, piece by piece. And that car would cost a fortune. And it probably wouldn't drive as well as the cars that we get off the assembly line now. And that's because of Wright's Law, which basically says when you double output of something, cost per unit goes down by about 25%. So all the efficiencies that we experience in life, the things that get cheaper in our lives, are because they get mass produced. And that mass production creates efficiencies. We don't do that with housing. Every piece of housing is a one-off stick-built project. So are we going to mass produce every piece of housing? Of course not in this country. But there is a lot of housing that can be built at scale. And the knock on that technology is that it's always been 10 years away. But actually, it's starting to culminate now, and it's not an academic project. We're seeing countries like Sweden that are mass producing a lot of their housing, and it has reduced cost.
And go ahead, clap. I wanted to come back to NIH, and because I know you've spoken a lot about the medical funding cuts, and just help us understand why that's so important, what it means to Massachusetts, and how we combat those cuts.
So the NIH spends $35 billion a year on research, and the cuts that they're announced are not actually cuts to how much money is being sent out the door. They still have a budget of $35 billion. I think it should be more, but that's not the cut that I'm talking about. The cut that they're projecting is, think of it as research infrastructure, which is to say the facilities, the rent, the utilities, the IT, the support personnel that supports science research. The NIH funds that as well as the direct experiments. And what the NIH has said is we think that overhead is way too high, and we're going to lower it across the board to 15%. Now, one, that's illegal. Congress said they couldn't do that, which is why a judge blocked it. Two, 15% is too low. Research is expensive, and it does require support personnel and utilities and rent, et cetera. But three, as is often the case with the Trump administration's maneuvers, there is this kernel of legitimate critique, but that kind of expands and unravels into this cruel and unproductive outcome. Research probably could be more efficient, and there's 270 research regulations that have been enacted since the year 2000, and we should totally work with the NIH on streamlining those so that, it's not 60 or 70%, it's more like 30%. But that requires actual policy work, not just a statement issued by a DOJ member. So we're in this position of fighting, but then also trying to actually get to a sustainable outcome.
I know you have a flight to catch, so I've got two more questions, but also want to mention, if you want more and you want to understand more where the Congress is coming from and a chance to ask questions itself, we're going to be hosting a business community town hall on April 16th at 2 p.m. By Zoom. We'll make sure everyone knows about that who's here today, and we'd love to see you, and thank you for making yourself available for a second opportunity for that event. So two more questions. One is, Teddy, Grace, and Audrey, your three kids, right? Well, how old are they?
5, 3, and 2.
Okay. What keeps you up at night worrying about them and their future in this country, and what gives you hope, and where do you feel optimistic?
It's a real softball, Greg. Thanks. It's a little bit of a cheesy answer, but it's true. What gives me hope is talking to their teachers, their preschool teachers and their pre-K teachers. You see such goodness in that, people who are, putting my kids' best interests first throughout the day, and they're doing that for everybody else's kids. And I'm in a pretty rough and tumble and corrosive business, frankly, but to see that is sort of therapeutic for my soul. What keeps me up at night? Obviously the things that we're talking about, but in particular the social media corporations. As a parent, I feel powerless against these social media corporations. They are the richest, most powerful companies in the history of the world, and they have become so by attention fracking our kids. The good news is I'm not just a parent, I'm also a member of the committee with jurisdiction over them. And we got to peel the bark off of these companies. They have become so arrogant and so above law and accountability or a duty of care to their users. And I regret to say that for 30 years, Congress has passed not a single piece of legislation to rein them in. Their moment is coming. Their ticket is going to get punched because a younger generation of lawmakers, particularly parents, are fed up.
Okay, this one should be easier because you knew it was coming. And this is a question we've been asking at chamber events for a long time, and a lot of electeds have had to answer this one who are in this room today. If you could go back into history, world history, any day, one day, observe but not change anything that happened that day, which day would you choose just to watch?
You're right that he did give this to me in advance, and I still don't have a great answer to it. I'm a history nerd. I'm an American history nerd, so it's obviously something there. I think it would probably be George Washington's farewell to the Continental Army Officer Corps at the end of the Revolutionary War. I've read first-person accounts of that goodbye meeting. It was in New York before he sailed back to Virginia, and they were in a tavern, and they were just kind of telling war stories and talking about the future of the country, and it was very emotional. And everyone who was there said it was the most unforgettable moment of their life, and I think that would be a special place to be.
Congressman, thank you very much for your leadership, your friendship, and for being with us today. Thank you very much. And a reminder, again, that date is April 16th. We'll have Congressman Auchincloss for an hour on Zoom, so you'll be able to join there. Also, I hope you all heard about our small shops program that we announced last week. I actually feel really great about this. We have decided that our smallest retailers need the support. They need to be part of our community. They need to be part of the chamber. So we've made free membership for all of our chamber member retailers. It's an opportunity to not just help those businesses, but to help save and preserve our small downtowns and village centers, something we think is very important. And we're very excited about it and gratified by the support we've been getting. We've been signing up a lot of the retailers to this program, and we've also received financial support from a number of you, including folks who are in the room today, to support this program to underwrite the lost revenue that we would have experienced from letting these folks join for free. But we're really very excited. And if you know, when you go into your favorite small retailer, do tell them they can now become a member of the chamber for free and invite them to come to our website. Okay, Governor Healey, I'm not going to give you a long introduction. You know who she is. I just want to say that she is someone who's really been tenacious and been on our side in the business community for quite some time now. And she does it with grit and leadership, and we're delighted to have her here today. This is the first time that she's speaking to us as governor, but some of you remember she was here in this room as Attorney General, spoke to us. And actually, there was a moment, Governor, when you did your first debate, or one of your first debates when you were running for Attorney General with me and with Chamber debate. So, Governor, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thanks, Dave. Well, good morning. Good morning. Really appreciate it, Greg. It's great to be with you. Great to be with the Chamber. Thanks for all you do, especially those in leadership on the board. Wonderful events I'm reading about at my table that you have coming up, ways to support not only business, but also local communities right now, and that's super cool. I know you just heard from the our great Congressman, Jake Auchincloss. I agree with a lot of what he has to say, so I'm the second half of the show, I guess. I also am delighted to be here with Mayor Fuller and City Manager Parakis, our city councilors, select board members. We see many members of the legislature here, including Senator Cream, Rep. Sangiolo, Rep. Peisch, Representative Schwartz, Rep. Tarski, former reps, Denise Garlick and Kay Khan as well. Delighted to be joined by members of our administration, our Secretary of Economic Development, Yvonne Howe, Undersecretary Sarah Stanton, and Kate Kelly from my office. So I look out at this room and I think, gosh, how lucky am I to be governor in this great state with great chambers like this one. You all are such a cross-section of stakeholders and really representative of so much of what makes things go here in the state. So I just want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you for doing business here in Massachusetts. Thank you for what you give to our economy. Thank you for the teams and the employees and the workforce that you support. From day one, I have been a pro-growth, pro-business governor, and we have worked hard to try to find ways where we can continue to power our economy, really boost our economy, and also find ways to reduce some of the barriers and the frictions to the way that you all engage and do work. I'll tell you this, it's an ongoing process. You probably know this from the work that you do. There are certain things you inherit, right, when you step into certain jobs. I inherited a real lack of housing in the state. We should have been building housing for years. For whatever reason, we weren't. One of the things I did as governor, I said, you know what we need? I need a plan right now. I need to identify so we can tell the public just how bad this housing crisis is. And I was the first governor to do that inventory. The results came back. We're down a couple 100,000 housing units, and I've set a goal of building that over the next few years. We've got to work through that. I also inherited kind of a transportation fiasco, and I went out and hired this guy who's been pretty good, GM Phil Ang, and you know, for the first time in 20 years, we don't have slow zones on the T. We just opened up a new line running down to Fall River in New Bedford. We're making significant investments in transportation infrastructure, which are going to improve things like traffic congestion and what you experience along 95 and 128 and 93 in the Pike every single day. But I just want you to know where my head is at in terms of the fundamentals that I think make for the best quality of life for residents in our state, and also make for the best business environment, which is let's have a lot of housing so that we can continue to recruit and retain a workforce here in our great state, and let's make sure that we have the kind of infrastructure in terms of transportation that meets the moment. But I just I wanted to offer that at the outset. Sometimes, you know, no matter, there's an endless stream of crises and things that present themselves, right? But I need you to understand where my head is at, where our team's head is at, in thinking about how we confront things. How do we make life easier? How do we make life more affordable? How do we make things go? And Greg is right. I do bring a certain intensity. It's March Madness right now. I'm a former point guard. I cannot help it. And it really is about teamwork. Yvonne has given us all these Team Massachusetts bracelets. If you don't have one, you should get in the club and get yourself a bracelet. But it really is about teamwork. How do we work together to make things go? How do we tackle the challenges that are holding us back, right? And how do we move people forward? So I just really appreciate what I see in this room. I also appreciate, Greg, something that you did recently, and that is to look out for some of our smaller businesses, our independent retailers. I know that the Chamber recently extended free membership to independent retailers, and I think that is so, so important. I want to give you great credit for that. Our main streets, our communities depend on these businesses. Our larger employers depend on them to create an environment that attracts workers, and they've been under a lot of pressure. Everybody's been under pressure through the pandemic, but particularly for these folks, we know it's been hard. And so I really commend you for giving them a break and recognizing their importance. And I think that is also Team Massachusetts in spirit at work. You know, I want to give a little bit of an update too. Do you know that as we sit here today, I'm pleased to say 2 years in, of all the states in the country, we rank #1 in education, #1 in innovation, #1 in healthcare. This year, we have once again been ranked the best state to have a baby, best state to live if you're a woman, best state to raise a family. Our schools regained the #1 ranking on both the nation's report card and AP results. And we're the best state for working moms as well, and working dads as well. Now, a lot of that, you know, you should clap. You know, in part, it's because of laws and policies, actions taken by local government, by state government, and by a partnership with the business community. That's my philosophy. You know, to solve the challenges that we confront today, not only as a state, as a nation, as a world, it takes that kind of partnership and collaboration. And, you know, I appreciate that the business community, for example, has leaned in on childcare, recognizing it's an economic imperative. It's a foundation to being able to employ people. And, you know, as governor, I made sure that we continue to invest in childcare. We're the only state, I think, that has done this. We've grown the number of childcare seats the last couple of years. 45,000 kids this morning are in childcare who would not be in childcare were it not for the actions that we took. That also means their parents are able to go to work. So that's a good thing. By the way, I should also say we've been named the safest state and one of the most environmentally friendly states with the cleanest drinking water in the entire country. So I think quality of life does really matter. I suppose I should touch on what's happening in Washington and how that affects us. But I want to be clear at the outset. No matter what is going on in Washington, and absolutely what is going on in Washington has a direct impact on residents, on our economy here in the state. I am focused on what can I do every day to deliver for people here? How can I work with our team to deliver results? That's the focus. How do we grow our economy and create good jobs? How do we build more homes and create more reasonably priced housing around the state? How do we improve transportation from roads and bridges to trains and buses, strengthening our schools and expanding pathways into college, into careers that are the best for every student, and lowering the cost of living? These are the things that I am focused on as governor every single day, and that's what our team is focused on as well. Happy April. We know it's tax season. I'd say this, when we started 2 years ago, lowering taxes was a priority, and I'm proud that I'm the first governor in over 20 years to lower taxes in this state. This year, the tax cut package is in full effect, and if anyone hasn't done their taxes yet, take a look for some new opportunities. Massachusetts families now get the best child and family tax credit in the entire country, $440 per child in your household, no cap on that as well. We also have lower short-term capital gains than we did 2 years ago, capital gains tax. We also have a lower estate tax than we had 2 years ago. And for businesses, we've added more tax advantages for things like apprenticeship programs, employee benefits, and housing development. We're working hard to address costs on a number of fronts. At my State of the State, you may have heard me talk about primary care. All of you, I know, are paying too much in healthcare. We all are, right? That's where we've seen the biggest growth. And as we put together our budget, I was acutely reminded of that, how much healthcare costs have gone up. But for my money, let's invest in some of the fundamentals: primary care, mental health. We'll save a lot more money if we deal with these things up front, keep people out of ERs, right? Keep people from, progressing with disease and illness that could have been treated earlier. So that's where we're going to make a huge investment and lower costs in the process. In energy, I've announced an energy affordability agenda to lower our bills, both in the short term and in the long term. A couple things that I wanted to go deeper on today are housing and transportation, because I think they are the key to affordability, our competitiveness, and our quality of life here in the state. I talk to governors from around the country, and we all talk about this issue we have with housing. It's not unique to Massachusetts. It's not unique to New England. Everybody is dealing with high housing costs. And we all know how that shows up. I know many of you still have young people living at home. It's wonderful to have your kids with you, but neither they nor you probably want them with you as long as they're having to stay with you, right? Many of you are dealing with parents who are, ready to downsize or to move on, but it's a real challenge figuring that out and where they're going to go. Some of you are looking to recruit and hire talent, right? We want to bring people into our state, but even people making six figures, it's a challenge in a dual income household or having trouble moving here. I see it. I know it. I want you to know that I feel that every single day, and I feel a real pressure around that. And that's why we've made housing the top priority out of the gate after we cut taxes. A $5.2 billion housing bill. That's a bill that we worked on, we wrote. I'm grateful to the legislature for passing it. It's going to be transformative. Now, it's going to take a little time, but already we are seeing the results. And I say to anybody, if they talk about how long it's going to take, that just means get after it. Get after it. And we're not going to stop just with that housing bill either. It means we should be looking, and I think that Congressman Auchincloss is right, we should be looking every day for ways to speed this up. In Austin, Texas, you know what they did in 2 years? They built 50,000 homes. 50,000 homes. So we're short, in our estimate, a couple 100,000 homes. It should not take decades for us to get there. We need to move, and we need to move on this now. And what they did in Texas was able to get their vacancy rate back to a healthy level. And by the way, if you're looking for statistics, average rents dropped by 22%. Basic supply and demand, right? That's what we need to do. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Why do I know that? Because Greg and the incredible work of this chamber. Thank you so much for your advocacy around housing. Thank you to all the local officials and leaders in this room who have been on the front lines on this issue. I know it's not easy. There's a lot of body blows, to put it nicely, and I really appreciate you standing up on this important issue. The funding, yes. That really brought down the house. Jesus. It's energy conservation. It's good. I'm going to keep talking. Let me tell you what we've done. So with that legislation, one of the things we did, accessory dwelling units, right? ADUs, they're coming online. This is going to be a quick way to bring more units online. We're going to add tens of thousands of these units just over the next few years. We also are finding ways to utilize more housing. Yes, at the outset I said I want an inventory of every single state property because we got to use underutilized state properties for housing. We really do. And that's what we're looking to do. I appreciate the Chamber's support and the region's support for the MBTA Communities Law, which is also about unlocking more housing in the state. Thank you to Watertown and Needham for passing plans that are now in interim compliance status. Congratulations to Newton for having its MBTA Communities Plan approved and is now fully compliant with the MBTA Communities Law. I'm also pleased to say that as of today, Wellesley's plan is also fully compliant. So, congratulations to Chair Colette Elfrink and members of the Select Board and to all the residents of Wellesley. In total, we've got 119 communities that have passed new zoning laws in response to this, and they've said yes to the benefits of housing. Already across these districts, nearly 4,000 new homes are already in development. So we can get there, and trust me, I've got a thermometer going. Of how many units we're bringing online, and we're counting and looking at that every single day. That tax package I referenced, one of the things we included in there were tax credits for developers, and just through that HDIP program, we have increased the pipeline for market rate housing units in gateway cities by 600% in just the last 18 months. That means 1,200 new homes. So bit by bit, we're going to get there. And I appreciate the continued support on that. We know what it's going to do to lower costs, to moderate costs, to help us grow a workforce, and to help Massachusetts be more competitive. This is so key to our success. The goal is reachable, but it does require a different way of doing things, and it does require an adjustment of attitude in a certain respect, and an attitude that embraces housing as a sign of vibrancy, as a sign of economic development, as a sign of growth. And that's one that I hope everyone can support, and I encourage you, you may not have time, it's busy, I understand that, but when you have local meetings where this stuff is being discussed, this is your opportunity. Sometimes people say, government's too much to remove. This is your opportunity to shape government, to shape policy, and to shape what's happening in your community and around the state. So I encourage you to go and show up and be an advocate for more housing opportunity, for economic growth in our state. Another way that we need to save money for folks and cut costs is by eliminating these brokers' fees for renters. It's not fair, and it's on the docket, and I hope we're able to do that. Transportation, this is another big piece of the puzzle affecting the quality of life here, and it's something that we neglected as a state for far too long. When we took office 2 years ago, we found, needless to say, a frustrating environment when it came to transportation. Bridges were in rough shape, forcing long detours, too many streets filled with potholes and cracked sidewalks, broken dams, busted culverts. We've seen the effects of all of this stuff. And so, in my view, there was just a history of underinvestment, in some instances, mismanagement for far too long. And so I think that we've put in place the right leadership team at both the MBTA and the Department of Transportation, and we have focused on getting after it. And using more than $9 billion, that's what we were able to get the last couple of years in federal funding. I set up that federal funds office to go out and apply for federal funds. We brought back $9 billion to the state. A lot of that we have put right into transportation. And as a result, we moved from 34th in the country to 7th in the country, ahead of much larger states in many instances in the amount of infrastructure investment that we were able to make. We got big projects moving, everything you've read about, Cape Cod bridges, and more. We've also got more resources coming to cities and towns at a time they really need it. I remember, God, it seems like yesterday, but I guess it was back November, Mayor Fuller, when we stood with you and the congressman and our local electeds to celebrate our commitment to rebuilding the Newtonville commuter rail station. And that was great. We won a $67 million federal grant to upgrade accessibility along the Green Line. And last week, we launched South Coast Rail. I mentioned that, which is now providing service from Boston to Fall River and New Bedford for the first time in over 70 years. So there's so much more work to do. But we can say now to drivers, to riders, and to taxpayers, the money you invest is going to get you results. We can start building a system that this state deserves. Here's how we're going to do it. Our funding strategy does not require new taxes. What it requires is smart, forward-thinking fiscal management, and it means a bigger investment over time. Our plan has been to leverage that fair share revenue, and in doing so, we're going to be able to invest $8.4 billion over the next 10 years in transportation infrastructure alone. $8.4 billion in 10 years over transportation infrastructure. Think about how transformative that is going to be for our state. Let me tell you what that also means, importantly, to our cities and towns. Increasing funding for local roads and bridges by 50%. You need it big time. It also means closing the T's budget gap and taking care of business there to get that on for the first time in I don't know how many years, decades, to get that on stable financial footing. We're also going to put another couple $100 million into culverts. Why do culverts matter? Because if you've got a busted culvert or plugged up culvert, you're going to see massive flooding. You're going to see destruction of roads, right? Bridges. We've seen it with the flooding. We've got to head this stuff off. So that's what I wanted to say about transportation and housing in particular. But as I wrap here, I do want to say a little bit more about the approach to Washington and the new administration. I've said from the outset, where the Trump administration is working with us, is working with Massachusetts, is supporting our economy, supporting our businesses, supporting our residents, sign me up, all in. But when the administration does things that hurt our economy, hurt our businesses, hurt our residents, I'll be the first to stand up. And unfortunately, we've seen some things come to pass that I believe are getting in our way. You know, we're a state. There's a reason Massachusetts is #1 in all those places. And by the way, I say that as I should. I'm your governor. You want me bragging on our state, and you want me every day working hard to make sure we're one across a number of categories. I say that recognizing that we're not perfect. There's a lot of work still to do, okay? But we start from a good place. And one of the things, I think, through time, that has catapulted us to the head of the class is that we believe in the power of human beings and talent. We really do. And we're a state that leads in talent and leads in innovation because we invest in our schools and our students. Remember, the first school in the country, Massachusetts, right? First public school. We invented public education. We actually invented the first library, too, right? So knowledge, education, supporting students, this has been part of what has made us so successful, and that will never change as long as I stand before you as governor. We're also a state that knows that women and people of color at the table are not a flaw. There's strength. There's strength. And we're not going to back down on that. We're going to continue to embrace diversity because it actually improves outcomes and makes us more competitive. Why would we lock anybody out, shut anybody out? Doesn't make sense. And also in Massachusetts, we believe that women should make their own health care decisions, not the government. That's a quality of life issue. It's also an economic issue. It's a big time economic issue. So every time they do something that raises costs or costs jobs or hurts our economy, I'm going to speak up. Now, tariffs. There's some out there, tariffs might help, tariffs might not help. I tend to believe, as a general matter, tariffs, put aside the negotiation tactic of tariffs. Tariffs are not a good thing for us. Tariffs are not a good thing for us. When I talk about housing, where do you think our lumber comes from? Canada. Our gypsum and the other materials for housing? Mexico. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with Canadian governors. Everyone's so worried about this and how this is just going to wreck both of our economies. Not good. Not good. And so unnecessary. When they go into effect, they raise costs for consumers and they weaken our economy. And we're going to see prices go up on everything. So I'm going to continue to speak out in opposition to those. The other thing I'd say is, I don't know about you, but this whole instability, as governor, I want as much capital deployed in our state as possible, right? Right now, everybody's sitting on their money, right? And that is not good for our state. It's not good for our country. But that is what is happening around the United States right now, with all this chaos and uncertainty and back and forth about what's going to happen or what's not going to happen on so-called, quote, Liberation Day, I wish he would focus on liberating us from actual higher costs and continued inflationary pressures, and also make us stronger as a country. I'll talk about NIH in a minute. But just last week, you probably saw economists started dialing back their forecasts for United States growth. And it was not just a few, it was across the board. The Federal Reserve, S&P, Vanguard, Morgan Stanley, big list. And they, don't listen to me, I'm just a liberal arts major, but listen to them, because they say that these tariff policies are driving up prices for both businesses and consumers. That's what they said last week, all of them. And they're slowing down overall economic growth. I don't think that's what people voted for. I really don't. And I hate to see the harm coming to American businesses, and I hate to see how much it's helping our competitors. I've been raising a lot of alarm about what's happened with cuts to medical research, what's happened with cuts to NIH. We are so blessed in this state to have not just best in the country, but best in the world, world-class hospitals and health systems, including Newton Wellesley, one of America's best. And we know, and the research that is performed at our hospitals and our universities saves lives and also fuels a vibrant innovation economy. There is a reason Massachusetts is the global hub for life sciences. It didn't just happen. It's because we make these investments. As you know, Massachusetts leads the country in NIH funding per capita. And that money, that research, so much is at risk right now. I'll say a couple things. Number one, in this state right now, understand that there are people who are actively involved in clinical trials. I mean patients, recipients, right, in need of life-saving cures and treatments, who've had those treatments stopped because of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk have done. Number two, we have universities and teaching hospitals having to make hard decisions about class sizes, having to cut and reduce the number of postdocs or research programs that are happening because of these cuts. And, I'm told that if you lose a month of research, that can set you back 10 years. That's happening live right now. I don't know if you know anybody who's received one of these notes saying your research funding has been taken away. It just happened to be in different places over the weekend. I heard from no less than 3 people who had research funding removed. That's how pervasive NIH funding is in our economy here in Massachusetts. The other thing is, and this really offends me, for a president who purports to put America first, let me tell you what is happening. We have folks from China, the government of China, and other countries as well, on our campuses in Massachusetts, recruiting scientists, researchers, and postdocs. And they say with the invitation, your funding's going away, but come to China, we'll give you a lab, we'll give you 90 staff people to go along with that lab, just move over and continue the work. Now, I'm all for research being done anywhere in the world, okay, if it's going to help cure diseases. I mean, how many of you have a loved one who has or has had cancer, Alzheimer's, ALS, who struggles with heart disease, diabetes? I could go continue on, right? We want cures, we want treatments. But I sure would prefer it if those were developed and innovated right here in the United States of America. So we need to fight hard for this, and we need to continue to speak out. I said a couple weeks ago that you may not be in the life sciences business, but life sciences is in you. All the construction jobs to build out lab space, office space, research space, the real estate firms, the law firms, intellectual property, they're all the folks who make stuff and then deliver it as part of this supply chain for R&D that happens all over our state. By the way, Worcester is 15th in the country in life sciences, okay? So this is just a major, major issue for our state, and we need to fight for research funding, for science funding. Every dollar that's invested in research in this state returns an estimated $2 to $3 in economic growth for our state. It's a big, big deal. It's super, super important, and we need to hold on to this, and we need to educate people about what this really means. Not only how important it is for Massachusetts and so many states, because by the way, I mean, University of Alabama, I think with their NIH funding, that is so central. I mean, Texas, I mean, everybody receives this funding, and it just makes no sense to take this away. No sense at all to take this away. So that's what's happening there. I'll say that in addition, we're also seeing cuts. I applaud the Attorney General for taking action to try to stop bad things from happening, like continue federal funding cuts and federal funding freezes. Right now, the threats to Medicaid are very real. We've got Medicaid here. It provides health care to 2 million people in our state, including 700,000 children. Threats to Social Security for our seniors. We've already seen the firing of veterans across the federal workforce, because a third of all federal workers, turns out, are veterans. But we've also seen, in addition, cuts to the VA and health care taken away. So, you know, this is not good, and targeting some of the most vulnerable among us is not who we are. It's not who we are as a country, and I think we've got to be really strong with that. I make that comment not as a partisan comment, but I make that comment as an American and somebody who believes in the social fabric of our society and of our country. And I think these are things that, you know, I think there's tremendous commonality around. So thank you very much for having me here this morning. I look forward to continued dialogue with you. Greg, up here, you can put me on the hot seat. And thank you for everything that you do in your communities. I look forward to continued partnership with the Chamber. My entire team and administration does as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for being here with us. You mentioned, it's actually the first thing I want to do, you mentioned that Secretary Howe is here with us, and there she is. Secretary Howe is going to be speaking at our spring business breakfast on May 14th. And what I'd like you to do right now is you tell everybody why they should come see Secretary Howe. Go ahead.
Oh my God. Well, just the warm-up act for Secretary Howe. Come see Secretary Howe speak. Yvonne Howe is a dynamic leader. She is out of, this is her first journey in state government. She never worked in government before, but I recruited her specifically from business so that we could have the most kick-ass economic development secretary that this state has ever seen, and we have one in Yvonne Howe. So come listen to her.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so I have a couple quick questions for you. I know your time is limited. we have a climate crisis, we have a housing crisis. Sometimes those two things work well together. When you build housing close to transit and you build smaller homes, it's environmentally good. If you build housing close to jobs, it's good for the environment. Sometimes they're not so good in that when we try to wean our businesses and our buildings and our homes off of fossil fuels and other efforts to try to reduce that, that can really drive up the cost of housing and housing affordability. How do you balance those two?
Well, you have to balance it, and I'm very, very sensitive to this. We have to do it in a way that moves things forward directionally, but also doesn't, as you suggest, Greg, harm business in the process, harm economies, raise costs for people. And that's what we've tried to do. It's a balance. We need to continue to operate with that mindset. I recently took action and went hard at the utilities, and they did make some changes. Our Department of Public Utilities is doing further work on that. But let me just say, as a general matter, that meant taking some things away, reducing, making changes to some of what shows up on bills for ratepayers. That's really important. But even the Mass Save program, that is something that's been on the bill. It's a program created a few years ago. There's a lot of legislation on this, and a lot of it's been really good and important. I mean, Mass Save if we didn't have Mass Save, your electricity bills would be 14% higher than they are today. But we've got to right-size some of this, particularly in this moment. As governor, I am very focused on bringing more energy in to this region. At the end of the day, that's what we need. We need more energy into this region so that prices will go down. I'm glad that hydro is going to come in from Canada this year. We've got to take all advantage of all sources that we have here. I wish we could get, the modular nuclear up faster and running. I've got a goal to create a $100 million AI hub. We're going to do that. But you need power to do this stuff. So you got to bring more energy online, which is a reason, Greg, I've been very frustrated at the Trump administration for trying to take wind off the table, kill wind. We've got windmills that are already up and going. That's a independent source of energy for us and for the region. And so, my plea to them is, why are you taking that source away? We need all of the above, right? And I just say that because the way we're going to deal with this is by, it's supply and demand. We've got to bring more energy into the region. In the meantime, I'm going to be filing legislation around energy affordability. We want to exhaust every possible way in the short term to drive down energy costs for residents and for businesses.
Thank you. You mentioned transportation, and I know you have a list of recommendations for transportation funding. Here in our western suburbs, we've been paying tolls in the Mass Pike since 1952. Only our western suburbs, and then folks go through the Tobin and the two tunnels pay tolls. Why not have tolls the rest of the state? We're willing to pay our tolls, but why not do them elsewhere?
I know that's been a subject of discussion. I think it's important to have discussions about all of this, about what we're doing and who's paying for things. I appreciate that and that sensitivity. I'll also say that I think you see in our budget, Greg, and what we've done, what we plan to do with transportation, is to really think about it as a statewide matter, and that's why money is going places that it hasn't gone before. We're all in this together. So I think we need to continue to operate with that mindset.
Let me ask you a question as a manager, as a CEO. So every executive wakes up in the morning with a list of things they want to do. They want to do this week, next week, this quarter, whatever. But there's always that moment when something changes, right? Something hits the fan. And these days, something hits the fan every hour, it seems. How do you, as a manager with your team, kind of react to everything that's happening and wade through what's worth reacting to? How do you manage your team in this way?
For me, it's helpful that I played sports, because the minute you're playing defense, or you're responding to, reacting to, rather than creating the offense or making the defense do certain things, you're losing. So, number one, you've got to be, and the team I have is awesome. I'm so fortunate to work with all of our secretaries, the lieutenant governor, people across the board. Number one is being clear, what are our goals? Where are we on offense? And what are we driving every day? And while things come in the door, you have to stay focused on what are the things that you are trying to accomplish. That's why I think we were able to get a lot done the last 2 years. Cutting taxes, major housing bill, major transportation bill, major bill around permitting and siting reform, right? So you've got to keep your eye on the ball. Number two, you've got to anticipate all the contingencies and the crises. Are you going to anticipate everything? Heck no, especially as governor, because we cover a lot. And there's unbelievable some of the stuff that comes up. But how do you anticipate crises or problems, including from a federal administration? I mean, he laid everything out in Project 2025. So, you know, we've anticipated some of this. So how do you position yourself to be ready to respond? And then when the crises do come, I mean, my tact is to deal with it right away. Because if you don't, things fester, they grow, and you know, you've got to just nip it in the bud when it happens, and operate. I have to operate. I don't know. It is a little different managing a public entity where 7 million people are looking to you for answers and responses and action every day. And not everyone is aligned in terms of their interests in certain outcomes, right? So it's something that you have to navigate when you're in these public roles. But how do you find common ground? How do you build consensus around the stuff that is important, right? I think most people in this state, they want housing. They want housing that's reasonably priced, that they can afford. They want their kids to have a good education. They want access to health care. And they want a quality of life, right? And safe communities. And I think, you know, if you focus on the things that bring people together, I think you can build that consensus and therefore be able to get more done.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, for your leadership, for especially leaning in on housing, because it's so important, and we know in our western suburbs that we need to do more, and we're really grateful for that. Last question. If you could travel back in time to any day in world history, observe but not change that day, which day would you choose?
How can I not say April 19th, 1775, when people stood on a bridge in Concord and a field in Lexington? And even in Arlington, where I live, though it was not Arlington then, the British were retreating, and the folks in what is now Arlington took shots. So, you know, I think about that in all seriousness, because we got to remember, this is the birthplace of American democracy. This is the birthplace of our country. I kid with the governors of Pennsylvania and Virginia who want to claim some entitlement to that moniker, but it really all started here. And as imperfect or challenging as it may be, what an amazing, amazing thing that was created. And remember, it was created not by a lot of highfalutin politicians, actually. Many of them at the time, remember, were subservient to a king. It came about because there were tradesmen, there were farmers, there were people who were fighting for a better life, a better world for themselves, who found within them the guts, the fortitude to stand down, and I say this with deep love for our UK brethren and sisters, the redcoats, right? They found it within them to do that. And so I just think we need to remember that. Last night I was at the National Guard Armory in Concord. I was at an event, we were celebrating this wonderful organization where young people and their parents, and NCL, they do wonderful charitable work throughout the year, and they happen to host this tea in the Concord Armory. If you've never been, you should go. It's super cool. It's where the National Guard Museum is right now, and it was just very powerful to be there and to think about in this moment that we're in, where we've been, all that's happened, and also all that's possible. That's what we got to remember every day. Keep moving forward. There is so much good. Hey, I get to hear a lot about crises and tough stuff. I also get to see every day just magic at work happening all around the state. So many people doing so many amazing things. So many people doing things that are going to change the world even, right? And that is something special about this state, and why we need to continue to work together. And with that, I know that so much is possible.
Governor Maura Healey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great morning.